Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu-Alaikum, dears. We will be discussing in this video the introduction to the course, the philosophy of language. Let's start. When we hear a word, any word in any language, do we understand what the word means? If we say that the word is what we hear, the sound, we are making a big mistake. Why? Because in one language, the four-legged animal in the world is referred to as dog, the sound dog, while in the other language, in the Urdu, it is kotta, or in any other language, it might be another sound. So, what does word mean? Not a sound. And if the meaning is not in the sound, then is there any meaning in the mind of the speaker or the listener when he or she uses the language? Again, it is a very difficult question to answer. If I ask you, what does justice mean? You know the answer, but you cannot show me the image that comes to your mind. So again, it is very difficult to say that the meaning is the mental image or the mental concept. Then if we say that meaning is outside in the world, then when I say the word cat represents a reality, an animal in the world, there are so many words whose reality cannot be represented. These and some other questions like this are the foundations of the subject or course, the philosophy of language. And in this video, I am going to introduce the course, the philosophy of language. It is the first part of the series of videos. If you are interested in this course, you can watch other videos. Let's start this video by defining the philosophy of language. Philosophy of language is the systematic philosophical study of the meaning, reference, nature of language, reality, thought, and the relationship of truth with language. Most of the students might ask that this is more like grammar or linguistics, but there is a difference. A grammar tells you the rules of a language, while the linguistics is the scientific study of a language, how language is structured and used, its meaning, its uses in the society, and its different forms. On the other hand, the philosophy of language focuses on much deeper questions. The questions like what is language in itself? What is meaning in itself? How language represents reality? What is the relationship of thought and language? Can we think without language? And there are so many other questions. In the definition that we just mentioned earlier, there are four basic things. We said that the philosophy of language is the philosophical systematic study of what is meaning. So the first thing is the issue of meaning. And this is perhaps the oldest and the most debated question in the philosophy of language and linguistics, as well as in semantics. The second thing that we focused after what is meaning was what is reference. When I say the president of Pakistan, I'm using words to represent something in the real world, and this is known as reference, but it is not that simple. This reference has so many deeper issues, and we will be analyzing this very issue in the later videos. Then the definition focuses on the third thing, the relationship of language and thought or language and reality. Is thinking an independent phenomenon, or first we think, then we use language to process the thinking, or can language influence thought, or can it determine thought? These are difficult questions to answer, and this is one of the core area of the philosophy of language course. The last but not the least, the truth. What is the relationship of truth and language? If I say it is raining, what makes this sentence true or false? So the truth conditions are very philosophical in nature, and this is one of the most significant areas of this course, the philosophy of language. A student may ask, what is the difference between the philosophy of language and the linguistics? We can understand it by an analogy. A physicist studies how things fall, how matter behave, how energy moves, but the philosopher of physics might ask, what is matter really? What is the nature of energy? What is that something that causes something fall? In the same way, we can say that a linguist can ask, what is the structure of language? But a philosophy of language expert or scholar might ask, what is the nature of language? And the research in both these areas In the linguistics, we have empirical and descriptive researches, analytical researches, but in the philosophy of language, these are logical, philosophical, and conceptual in nature. And there is another important point. Both the linguistics and philosophy of language are very much connected with each other. For example, pragmatics that started with Austin and Greece discussion. The origin of this discussion was the philosophy of these two philosophers, and then it came to the field of linguistics. So they are interconnected. Most of the times, the philosophy provides the questions and that is answered empirically in linguistics. Let's discuss some historical background in brief. The philosophy of language as a formal academic discipline started in the late 19th and early 20th century with the works of Russell, Wittgenstein, and Frege. But the connections of this discipline goes back and are connected to the Greek philosopher Plato. In his famous dialogue, he asked the central question: is the relationship of word and what is it used for in the real world natural or just a convention? So the central question was, what is the relationship of the name and the thing it is used for in the real world? This is one of the difficult questions and still is the center of the debates in linguistics and philosophy of language. What changed in the late 19th and 20th century in this academic discipline, the philosophers began to think, can they use mathematical logic to analyze the meaning or the structure of a language? Can they be more precise about is true and false in language? And how can we come to know that the sentence fulfills all the requirements of felicity conditions or truth conditions? So the focus in the 20th century was on the Ogden and Richard semantic or semiotic triangle. Is meaning in the sentence, in the mind, or in the world? Then nature of language, how it represents reality, and what is the relationship of reality, thought, and language? And then what do we do with language? And this created a linguistic concept, speech act theory. So does language represents the world or the actions? Or if both, how? And the last, the Wittgenstein argument that there are so many things that we can feel and show but cannot say it. And these are the aesthetic, ethical, or feelings or emotional values which challenges the limits of language. And if a student thinks that he is a linguist and he has nothing to do with the philosophical understanding of the language, he is or she is wrong. Why? Because most of our linguistic studies are connected, are based on the philosophical assumptions provided by the early philosophers. For example, semantics is directly related to the logic and truth conditions. Pragmatics is directly related to the philosophies of implicatures and maxims presented by different philosophers. The same way, critical discourse analysis is based or connected with the language and power, language and politics, language and ideology as philosophical discussions. So, being a linguist, knowing the fundamental philosophy behind the different concepts of linguistics is very essential. Let's take a moment and think what we have discussed. We started by defining or explaining what is word. Then we went on explaining the definition of the philosophy of language. Then we presented the analogy. How can we understand this course is philosophy of language? Then we distinguished between linguistics, grammar, and philosophy of language. And then we explained what are the major areas to be studied or is studied in this course, the philosophy of language. So the basic point is, what is the relationship of language with reality, with thought, with truth, and what is the nature of language, and how language represents reality, truth, and thought. In other words, philosophically, we can say what is truth, what is reality, what is thought, what is language, and what is meaning. We will be explaining all these concepts in terms of language connection in the coming videos. I will end this video by asking a simple question. Do you think that language shapes the way you think? For example, suppose your language has many words for color and any other language has less number of words for colors, or the vice versa. So can the user of that language sees the color more vividly, clearly than you, or can you see and identify the colors more clearly or not? So we can somehow understand that the language can or cannot influence thought. Write your answers in the comment below. If this video is helpful, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you so much.